Yukong, another great harmony-based unit, another great support. I'd say she's probably one of the iffier ones if you're looking to build around her, especially at E0, but don't get me wrong, her add-ons do help her out a lot. I think she's a wonderful unit, especially if you plan on using her with somebody like Welt or Dan Feng, because a mono imaginary team may work great alongside characters like Blade, because the crit damage bonus is quite nice, especially considering certain units such as Blade and Sealy can utilize her ults and especially her buffs longer than other characters because they get that technical extra turn. With Sealy it's much more prevalent, with Blade maybe not so much. Is she worth building? Yes. I'd say yes, but it's a tentative one. She's not more valuable than Tingyun or Bronya, but she is valuable enough to where I'd say if you have the expendable resources and don't know what else to do, build her up. She's going to be a good unit. She just requires a bit more help than others. With that being said, let's talk. Light cones. The break effect damage is nice with memories of the past, but your main focus should always be energy regeneration rate, whether it's memories of the past, whether it's dance, because the action forward does give you an extra turn, technically. If you're looking at meshing cogs, that's actually a pretty good option. I'd say that's better for Tingyun rather than Yukong, because Yukong does have a decent bit of damage in her kit, and the reduced attack and HP and defense is quite noticeable. Planetary Rendezvous is a light cone that I'd say has much more value in mono imaginary teams. I'd say it's actually worth building in those instances. Outside of it though, it's good for her damage, maybe just not everybody else's. And Carve the Moon, Weave the Clouds is a generalist option. If you purchase it from the Battle Pass, it's pretty viable on almost any Harmony character just because all of the buffs circulating around are quite good. Energy regeneration rate at 7% is nice. It's, I believe, a bit better than the Sprightly Von Rack set in the crit damage bonus, that's nice for everybody, as well as the attack bonus. So I'd say any one of these buffs are actually quite good for Tingyun particularly. For traces, I'd say the major traces, get them all up. They're all going to be used for one point or another, but for her primary traces, legitimately speaking, all of these are worth building out. The basic attack damage isn't necessarily super high because it's not a skill, it's not a burst, but it does have the essential effect of having a toughness bar or weakness break rate almost equivalent to an ultimate attack for characters. So it's worth building out. Skill. This is, I'd say, the most complex part of her kit, and I'm going to explain that once we actually get to the gameplay section. Complex, legitimately, go for anything. I understand people usually want to go for damage, but if your characters are dying quickly, feel free to slide in a Guard of Weathering Snow and maybe the Longevous Disciple for the HP, or Guard and the Longevous Disciple, or Knight set for defense, or anything. Legitimately speaking, she may need to survive a bit more, and if that's the case, feel it's not bad in any case scenario to have your characters built up with more HP and more defense if they aren't surviving long enough to actually help you out in battle. I go for the, as you can see here, bit damage from Musketeers alongside the Guard of Weathering Snow set because I have so many pieces from that set and they're not legitimately too bad, at least in comparison to what they could be. I also go for crit rate for the additional damage and attack because I'm going to be blunt here, speed tuning this character is awful. Break effect because she does do quite a lot of breaking and slow is quite nice, and then imaginary damage bonus. I do want to ideally slot that out for energy regeneration rate, but the Simulated Universe has not been too kind to me. For Eidolons, E1 is decent. It's a nice speed bonus to all of her party members. The problem you're going to see here though is that speed is an incredibly important stat to have on Yukong and incredibly important to know for your other characters. With this, I'd say the energy regen is nice. E2 is ideally the breakpoint I want you to hit. E4's value is incredibly dependent on E6. Because she's dealing a lot more damage with 30% more, it's good, but E6 allows you to have that nice roaring bowstring, which is essentially her buff immediately. And I'd say that turns her from a character who's strictly bent and meant to be a support into a bit of a sub DPS. But let me actually talk to you about her teams, and we're gonna do a slightly different variation of it. We're gonna slide in Silverwolf just because she's kind of a blatantly obviously good pairing with Sealy, but we're gonna slide out Bronya and instead have her like this, and that it's Sealy, Silverwolf, Yukong, Bailu. And we're gonna find the first enemy we see. Now, the biggest issue with Yukong is, especially if you're pairing her with somebody like Sealy, is that Sealy has the ability to increase her speed by 25 to 50% depending on her Eidolon variation. Yukong wants to be running right before Sealy, and if your characters boost the speed in any capacity, it's kind of a bad deal for you. In this instance, my Sealy is going before my Yukong. So we're going to use Silverwolf skill, we'll then slide over to Sealy. And as you can see here, Yukong is next, Bailu's next, Sealy is next. That isn't the rotation you want, and it only gets worse the more speed you have because you kind of need to take into consideration the increased speed bonus. But the reasoning is, once she uses her skill, and hypothetically uses a burst, so we're going to use skill here, the next character, as you see here in Bailu, has that additional rolling bowstring, which is 75% attack, and it would be crit if she used her ultimate. The problem is, Bailu uses up a stack of that even when she attacks. So as you can see here, 1 stack is lost. That means Zelie now has 1 less stack. And even though Zelie as a character does necessarily not use an additional turn just because she has Resurgence, and Resurgence counts as a continuous turn, the problem is your other characters like your Silver Wolves or any of the sub DPS you may have would also want that attack bonus that they're no longer getting. So speed tuning Yukong is incredibly important, and I'd say it's arguably one of the biggest downfalls and issues you may have with building her out if you don't know the speed of your other units. 109 speed is not a good ratio for her, I understand this. But if your Zelie has 128 and then gets 25% and another 25%, she's so much higher that it's going to take an incredibly long amount of time, an incredibly large amount of investment to reach that same point. I'd say Yukong is worth building, but understand that Eidolons like this do make her a bit more iffy simply because it's very difficult to match the speed of your DPS. Is she good for characters like Blade? Yes, perfectly fine. Is she good for characters like Yanqing? Perfectly fine as well. Her biggest contender is going to be Zelie, and because Zelie's best support would ideally be Bronya because Bronya can guarantee that next turn, it's a bit of an iffy thing for me to recommend using her together. I'd say if you're willing to speed tune her, she's a great investment, great character to have. If you're not, she kind of falls by the wayside in comparison to other units like Tingyun with her 3-turn buffs and Yukong or Bronya. Bronya is much better. Yukong has crit rate and crit damage and attack, but it requires you to almost speed tune based on how much speed your characters will have and not how much they do have, especially with Zelie. Either way, hope that's been helpful. If it has been, leave a like down below and I'll see you next time.